What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Unit 5.7, 5.8. This is a 2-for-1. Who doesn't love the 2-for-1s? Economic developments in the Industrial Revolution, 1750 to 1900. Last videos, we've kind of talked about the rise of this Industrial Revolution. It starts in Western Europe and it spreads, and then kind of the impact it has on new inventions and the impact it has on society. And this one's going to be, what is the impact of this Industrial Revolution on economics? Specifically in terms of new economic systems and how we view the economy's relationship with the individual. You'll notice there's a little bit of an Enlightenment idea there, like what's the role of the individual in the economy and what's the government's role in helping that individual or allowing them to just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps is the old famous term. So let's rock and roll and get into this. Here's the first thing. One of the major philosophies economically that develops during this period is called, and there's a couple different terms here I'm going to use that are all relatively synonymous, meaning that they are the same phrase to define the same thing. It is often called laissez faire, also known as free market, also known as capitalism, also known as liberalism in the 19th century. So I'm going to go through all those again. We got laissez-faire, which is a horrible French pronunciation of that, which means free market. And if you think of the market as the marketplace where people trade and they can freely trade, again, Enlightenment ideas here, right? So like the ability to trade as you see fit without the government getting involving you. And this is often referred to as kind of a hands-off economic theory. Hands-off when you hear laissez-faire, in that the government is not involving themselves in what is happening economically, meaning that the government should, and that this theory, which is promoted by Adam Smith, is that the government should not involve themselves in business affairs, that the government should not tell businesses what they can do, what they can pay, what they should make, how much they should produce, and it should all be up to businesses, because in a sense, what businesses are trying to do is to provide things that people want. And this idea of laissez-faire, if the people don't want it, the government or the businesses will stop making it. But if there's a market for it, if people buy it, then those businesses should be able to make more of it. And if consumers don't like that company X pollutes the environment, they will stop buying products from company X in order to have them stop polluting the environment. An example of this in modern day is, should the government of the United States force car makers to increase the amount of miles per gallon each car has and set a standard that says every car by 2025 should have 40 miles per gallon. That is not hands-off. That is the government telling businesses what to do, as opposed to a true laissez-faire free market capitalist thinker like Adam Smith here would say, if the people want 40 miles per gallon, they will only buy cars that have 40 miles per gallon, and therefore that's what car makers will develop. This is often, this liberalism here of the 19th century, I don't want you to confuse that if you know U.S. government terminology. This is not like modern day liberals in the United States, which are often referred to as left wing. This is a totally different concept of liberalism. So just kind of get that thought out of your mind. This is the basis for capitalism in the United States. This is really the basis of most of the origination of the U.S. economic policy in many Western countries. This is also the end of mercantilism. Instead of the government issuing these joint stock companies, this free market says that the government should get rid of these joint stock companies and get rid of mercantilism and allow any merchant to go out and trade, because the government should not get involved. I don't want to get into the critiques yet, but you know what, let's just do the critiques now. Here's the issue with this, especially going through the 1800s and early 1900s. What this system does is it essentially makes some people really, really, really rich. And those are the entrepreneurs and the capitalists and the very wealthy factory owners and business owners. And essentially what happens is these factory owners are trying to make as great of a profit as possible, because that is the goal in capitalism. And as a result, they're going to pay workers less and less. And they say, well, we got to pay a man $1 an hour. Horrible example, but let's just pretend that's real. But we can pay a woman 50 cents. And we want to maximize our profits, so let's fire all the men and hire women. And then eventually they say, we can hire women at 50 cents, or we can hire children at a quarter or 25 cents. So let's start hiring children. So the profits for these capitalists go up, but the issues societally go down. And if you're a true capitalist free market, you would say, well, if consumers don't like that they're hiring children, then maybe they just won't buy their products of these companies that hire children anymore. That's what a true capitalist would say. And it shouldn't be the government saying, oh, you can't hire kids, that it should be up to the consumer to not buy those products. And that's how laissez-faire works. In the United States today, we are not a true capitalist laissez-faire economy. The government gets involved in many different things that we'll get to in a second. As a result of these poor working conditions and these issues amongst workers in terms of how much they're getting paid and the working, all this stuff, the horrible stuff that we talked about in terms of the factory system for workers, a new theory comes up called communism. It's also synonymous with Marxism. So if you see these two terms, these are also synonymous with each other. A lot of synonyms here. This guy, Karl Marx, who's right here, he writes a pamphlet with his boy, Friedrich Engels. They're both from what is eventually going to be known as Germany. And they write a pamphlet called the Communist Manifesto. And essentially, this is a historical look at societies. And they basically say all of civilization since the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution, essentially, has been broken down into two groups, the haves and the have-nots. The people who have wealth and power and money, which is a small percentage of people, and the have-nots, which is the majority who have no power. And any civilization that you look at, that's the battle between these two groups of people. And in this case, he says the Industrial Revolution is all about the owners, who are the haves, who he refers to as the bourgeoisie, they're bad and bougie, and the workers, who are the proletariat, who are being treated horribly. So we have the majority of people who are the proletariat, they're treated bad, and then the owners. And his theory, Marxist theory, was that the workers should overthrow these owners and set up a society where the workers run everything. And instead of making a worker, like electing one worker to be the owner, because that worker who is elected the owner would then treat everyone poorly, we're going to set a society where all the workers are equal. And everyone makes the same amount, and we work together communally, that's the root of communism, together in order to have a society which benefits everybody. Instead of a society that benefits just the super wealthy, and everyone else, this is according to Marx, run around fighting each other for the scraps left over by these super billionaires, essentially, we should overthrow those billionaires, spread out the wealth amongst everybody, and we'll all be treated equally. In the ideal communist country, ideally, again, ideal, this is not what actually comes into practice, there would be no money. Everyone would just work for the benefit of everybody. I, as a teacher, would not work to get paid, but I would know that no matter what I need in society, it's covered without money. So, for example, I go to the grocery store and I get what I need and I walk out. If I need a new TV, I go to the store and I take a TV and I walk out. You can imagine, if you think about that, the critique and the criticism and how the mentality of a capitalist, that if you were listening to this in the United States of America, you grew up in capitalism. If I say you can get as many TVs as you need, your instinct is I'm going to take as many as I can possibly carry out because I want more. And Marx would say, because you are capitalist, you think in terms of greed as opposed to what's good for everybody. There's a lot of issues with this in practice. Of what communism is and how it actually is put into practice, but that doesn't come until the 20th century. So really, we don't see this again until we get into the 1900 to present time period, and we'll talk about the issues that come up in countries that attempt to go communist and to have this Marxist ideal put into place. So during this time period in Western Europe, very few people turn to this. We also see the development of what is called socialism. This is kind of the in-between phase. So we have capitalism over here, laissez-faire, no government involvement. We have communism over here, which is full government involvement, or essentially everyone is totally equal. And then we have this kind of middle ground in between the two. And this is where the government essentially owns all the major industries. So for example, the government might say, we're going to own the coal industry, the electricity industry, we're going to own all the major factories. Or it can also mean we're going to tax wealthier people more. So if you are one of these business owners, we are going to tax you heavily and then take this money and share out that money to the citizens in an equal manner, whether it's through services or through just straight up tax breaks. In the United States, I know this runs contrary to what a lot of politicians talk about today, but we do have socialism in the United States today. And this comes in the form of any service that's provided by the government and it's equally distributed amongst people. That is essentially socialism. Social security is a perfect example that you work your whole life and then when you're done working, you get a check from the government and everyone's check, no matter how much you made or how little you made, as long as you worked for a certain period of time, you get that money. public schools in this country are a socialist concept, in that no matter if you're rich or poor, we all are treated to equal access to education. Everyone who has property, for most states, if you pay your family members pay property tax on the property you live on, that money then comes to the school, who then distributes it equally to all students coming in. So the wealthiest property owner in the district and the poorest property owner in the district are all getting the equal access to services. If you don't have a kid in school, you still pay the property tax even though you're not using those services, and that is truly what socialism is. This is the same is true with roads, with highways, is that we all pay into this system. Even if I'm not using a highway in California, even if, I'm still paying tax dollars that are going to that, and that is what socialism is. There's a whole list here of socialist programs in the United States. Feel free to pause it, but it's extensive. So we are not truly in the United States a capitalist economy, and I just want to make that clear that there is an element of socialism here. So what happens? So in industrialized countries, which are very laissez faire in the 1750s through the 1900s, very few people, instead of turning to communism, most governments start to reform stuff to avoid people turning to communism and to keep this economic system in place. And when changing the system, it's going to essentially lessen the stranglehold of capitalism and shift just a slight bit in towards the government involvement section. So remember, laissez-faire, hands off. Now we're going to have government involvement. And what they do is a couple things. One, in most industrialized countries, they allow white, not just white, men, just men, to vote. This changes from what is in the United States, for example, and in Britain at the time, only property owners could vote, which limited workers in factories who had apartments. So in this case, we're allowing white men to vote, which is huge for workers, because now you can elect people who have your interest at mind, and those people who you elect will change the laws to benefit what's best for you, which is what the idea of democracy is. Also, they're going to make labor unions become legal. Unions are when workers join together and to protest poor conditions. There's police labor unions, teacher labor unions, firefighter labor unions, doctors, nurses, sanitation workers, construction workers. There's all these different unions today. They were illegal in the early 1800s, and you could be arrested for joining a union. Many people saw unions as being communist in a sense, because people are coming together and working together communally to improve conditions. These become legal by 1900 in most industrialized areas and allow workers to organize and elect one person to be their union president who negotiates on their behalf. If you follow Major League Baseball or the NFL or the NBA, they have a labor union that negotiates, and sometimes they go on strike in order to improve their working conditions. We also have the improvement of safety standards. So in terms of what needs to be, like, for example, do you need smoke detectors? Do you need fire exit signs? Do you need ventilation? What do you need? We have child labor laws that are put in place that limit the amount of hours people under the age of 16, well, at first it's 12 and then it's 14, and now 16 can work, how many hours you can work, when you can work. And also we see the rise as a result of this of political parties. You have different people who believe in different things, and the different political parties are going to represent those beliefs, whether it is a party that represents more entrepreneurs and wealthier people or working class people, and that shift in most countries of those parties developed during this period. Last but not least, we have other movements from this Industrial Revolution Enlightenment that I just want to point out. We do see the end of forced labor and slavery in the mid to late 1800s. I mentioned that there's this abolitionist movement really around the world during this period, especially in the 1800s, as a result of the Enlightenment ideas. And they do successfully push to end slavery right around the same time that the Industrial Revolution is on the rise. It's not all rainbows and unicorns that everyone was like, oh, we want to end this slave system because it's so horrible. Some people were like, if we don't end this system, we're going to have slaves working in these factories, and that's going to limit job opportunities and employment. So there's that side of it. Also, we're going to see a really big push for women's suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote. This is not a bad thing. Everyone sees it and they're like, suffering. Oh man, women's suffering. That's horrible. No, suffrage means the right to vote. So there's this demand for women's right to vote, and this idea of feminism and equality amongst females. A lot of this stuff is we're going to see this pop up again in the 1900s, and these women who are pushing for the right to vote aren't going to get it until the next time period. So more to come on that. That's a lot of stuff, everybody. A lot of terms, factors, ideas there. And this was a long video. Suck it up, deal with it. That's all I got. Any questions, as always, write it down. You know. I'm out.